I am Lexi from PIN. I will be facilitating the webinar from behind the scenes after this introduction, and I'll be on chat with you as well for any questions that you have throughout the presentation. So I'll hand it over to Joris for now to officially kick us off.
Fantastic. I'm curious about the question. How long will we have this open, Lexi, give or take?
We will have this open, let's say, for 2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay. So if everyone over the next 2 minutes can jump into Minty and explain what is the hardest thing for them about creating an annual strategy offsite. And then we're kicking off with our panelists already on the screen. So I'll give everyone 1 more minute or so about what is the hardest thing about creating an annual strategy. I'm curious if some of the current affairs and current circumstances are going to have an impact as well for folks. So many unknowns. The budget for initiatives is always a challenge for HR folks, isn't it? It's interesting, like the need for a business strategy to lead the process. I find that myself quite hard as well. Everyone is in planning mode at the same time, but we kind of depend on the planning done by other departments as well. So, it's kind of like this cascading problem, which is hard. I think the first one, do you see anything that lights up for you, Dipti or Noah?
I think it's all the unknowns, exactly like what you called out. It's absolutely right. That has always been one of the challenges for me too.
I think the budget one's a big one. And really, you really need to have that alignment with your CFO to make sure that those budgets are being kind of finalized before you're going into your offsite planning, or at least you have a general idea of what you have access to. Maybe you don't have it down to the pennies, but you've got a general idea of we have X amount of dollars approximately that we can play around with.
Cool. All right. Thank you, everyone. That's a good icebreaker and a lot of truth in there, and most certainly things that I've been dealing with as well. So I just wanted to welcome everyone to the webinar on how to plan the best possible strategic HR offsite. This is going to be our agenda today. An introduction, what to do before an actual offsite, what you need to do on the day of an offsite, and then the aftermath. And then we'll jump into questions from the audience as well. So this is what you can expect over the next 50 up minutes with questions included. And I hope that everyone will walk away with a real good idea and good ideas on how to plan a strategy offsite properly. If you go to the next slide, there's some housekeeping stuff that I would like to go through before we really dive in. There is a Q&A function, and you can ask the panelists questions during today's session. And you can do that at any time. You can wait until the end, but if you do it throughout the session, it's more helpful. Lexi, who you may have seen in the beginning of the webinar, is on the background collating some of these questions so we can answer them at the end. So thanks for the little wave there, Lexi. You can also chat with the panelists. You can use the chat feature. You can select panelist or attendee. So if you select panelist, it will just go to us. And attendees, obviously, it goes to everyone. You may also enable captions if you'd like, and you will get a live transcript. So simply click on more, enable the live transcript. It's about 40 minutes of tips and discussions, and then 50 minutes of Q&A. And we may be able to answer some Q&A questions throughout the presentation. You have also submitted some questions some responses beforehand, and we have tried our best to incorporate that into the webinar itself. So if your question does not get answered, it's not because we haven't read it, but please feel free to ask that question again if it doesn't pop up, and we'll try to answer that in the last 15 minutes. So who do you have on the panel today? First of all, Dipti Salopek. Now, Dipti, I know Dipti for a long, long time. Hi, Dipti. When I was living in New York and running HR at Squarespace, I think we met a few times. At that time, I'm not sure, Dipti, if you were working at Criteo or at Etsy at that point in time, leading HR. It was one of those two, at least. And then Dipti went on to lead HR at Snyk. A long, amazing companies you worked with. And I'm sure you have run plenty of HR offsites in the past. So thank you so much for joining today. And Noah Warder I think he's famous in the HR community. I most certainly see him on LinkedIn and providing tips and guidance all the time. And Noah, that's just super appreciated. I know that you understand this space very well. At the moment, Noah is leading people at Guusto. But I like as well, you've been a COO as well and a founder of a business yourself. So you understand not just what it's like to run HR from a people perspective, but also what it takes to actually build a company, which is, the stuff that I have to deal with at the moment, because I'm building Pin at the moment, the company that is hosting this webinar. Now, before Pin, though, I had a long career in HR. So I'm one of those practitioners turned founders stories. I used to run HR at Squarespace, and then for many years at Atlassian. And that's where I've led many of HR offsites in the past. And now I'm kind of building the business. So the strategy offsites I'm running right now are more company-based strategy offsites. That's our background. I think combined about 40 offsites between all of us for sure, in terms of what we have facilitated. So I hope that our tips will be able to will resonate to this audience here. I wanted to start today with acknowledging the current economic climates that are no doubt, I think we on the call today, and are a lot of companies that are tech companies. And especially in tech, but also in other industries, it's been quite rough out there, or quite rough. It's probably an understatement. And I've surveyed 600 companies. This is, a while back when we kind of checked the pulse of the companies that participate today. About 38% are either in survival or maintenance mode. And I remember this, a year ago, that looked completely different. Everyone was in growth mode. Everyone was growing, all right? I'm sure that Noah and Dipti, you've seen a very similar story as well out there.
Maybe if I can jump in here, because I do have a lot of thoughts about this. Firstly, I think the scale would have been different a year ago. It would have been growth, hyper growth, exceptional growth, or something like that. We just wouldn't even have had this scale that you have here. But the big thing for me is this notion of survival and maintenance. Even today, if your company is going through layoffs, if your company is not hiring, it is still in growth mode, because you need to rethink about what growth is. And we have an opportunity to reframe that. We are learning, we're becoming much more efficient. We're being forced to, whether we like it or not. The hyper growth of yesteryear was unsustainable, and was also kind of misaligned with the valuations of the company and the actual revenue that companies were earning. This is a part of our becoming more mature, of becoming kind of grown up as a company, is to operate a bit more lean and a bit more efficiently. It's growth in a very different format. And what I can say, with running my coaching business now, I am seeing that a lot of leaders across the board are really struggling with this transition. And that's an opportunity for heads of HR or heads of people to help support their leaders, provide the right coaching to actually go through this transition. So my biggest piece of advice for everyone, if you're thinking you're in maintenance or survival mode, reframe it, because you are also in growth mode. There's a transformation going on, and that transformation is growth.
I love how you frame that, Dipti. And I think we had these conversations earlier when we were kind of planning this webinar, and I think it's such a healthier mindset to look at instead of like looking at it sort of the pessimistic view of like, oh, we're just maintaining, or oh, we're just trying to survive. It's like, no, this is a really interesting opportunity for us to do more with less, or really flex those muscles that we didn't have to flex previously. And then the other side of like, with as HR leaders, is like, maybe we need to reframe the conversation of like, growth isn't just about headcount. It's not always about how many headcount you're adding per year, or per month, or whatever. It's about career growth. It's about skill building. It's about how those people in your organization are, expanding their horizons. It's not just about the headcount and how many people we have on payroll.
And from a personal growth perspective, I can tell you that like having gone through one set of layoffs in my career, it made me realize different things as well. Being in growth mode kind of blinds you to some of the strength of a business that you have to build. And sometimes we don't look at that closely enough, right? The first section of like sharing our advice is really on what to do before the actual strategy offsite takes place. And I can't emphasize this enough. Your strategy offsite actually makes or breaks by your preparation for it. If your preparation is not as good, you be sure that the strategy offsite itself is not going to be as good. And that often starts with who should be there, like who should actually be attending the strategy offsite. And for me, that was always a bit of a puzzle, because I'm a nice person, hopefully, and I always want everyone to participate. And but the strategy offsite will have a different form if you have different amounts of people present. So I have a quick poll for folks. In the last time that you did an offsite, or hopefully if you do an offsite in the next few months, how many people are you planning to have participating in the offsite? So if you can take literally like 15 seconds to quickly go into this poll and click one of these responses. I'm very curious to see how many people will attend your offsite. And if you are not doing an offsite in the near future, how much was it last time that you did an offsite?
All right, we've got about 70% participation. So I'm going to end our poll and share the results. So we had 58% of respondents said 4 to 12 people, and that's by far the most popular segment.
Which is super interesting, because that allows you to really have a strategy offsite. And let me go through that a little bit. If you look at the size of the group, your outcomes of the offsite that you can aim for are going to be very different, right? If you have a smaller group of people, you can really have those challenging, those deep strategic discussions, and your outcomes will probably be much more around strategic direction. But if the group is larger, you're getting more into, the ability to have those lengthy discussions is going to be less. And you probably, are more in planning mode. Like if you have a larger group of people, the key decisions probably have already been made, and you now have to work out trade-offs and timings of all of these things. So then you're starting to get more into HR planning versus HR strategy making. And if you have a large group of people, it's more of a team offsite, right? The outcome is more alignment. It's more shared understanding. The priorities have already been set. You already have your high level, year plan worked out. Now it's sharing with the team about what you're going to do. So I'm curious to hear from Noah and Dipti. How did you do this yourself in the past, and what kind of size groups did you have participating? Noah, I'll go to you first. Oh, sorry.
No, I was saying the same thing.
Yeah, I think it really depends on like the goal that you want to set for your offsite, right? So I think we chatted a little bit about this beforehand. It's like what are we trying to achieve with the offsite? Is the the goal of the offsite to come up with the strategic plan for, let's say 2023. Do we not know what that plan is? Do we need to come together and really develop that plan? Then you're going to want to have that small core group of your HR leaders across your organization to come together and have that discussion. And, maybe you're inviting your CEO for part of that, or you're inviting other department heads for part of that, or you're talking to them beforehand. And then if you've got that strategic plan already in place, like you said, Joris, you're doing that, like, let's have that sit down and build out our calendar for the year and kind of talk through it and do all those types of things. The ones that I enjoy the most personally are those smaller strategic discussions. I think you can delve into some really meaty topics, and it's easier to make a safer space for less people because you understand each other a little bit better. And you can have sort of those difficult conversations with each other and kind of give a little bit more of that raw, authentic feedback on ideas and how people performed in the past, and what went wrong in the previous year and what you want to address in the next year moving forward. So I really enjoy the smaller strategic offsites. I think there's a lot that you can do there in a shorter period of time, but each sort of group has a goal attached to it that is very important. And I don't think you can do a strategy offsite with 20 people. Just doesn't work, because everyone needs to have their say. You got to really hone it in and tie it in. But I'm also really interested to hear what Dipti has to say about this.
I actually really don't have more to add. I think you covered it and I thought it was fantastic. I'd just double emphasize the importance of being intentional. So decide the goal first, and then the offsite and the type of offsite will follow.
Do you feel people feel excluded if you don't invite them?
I just think you got to be honest in positioning it from the beginning. People feel excluded if they expected to be invited and then they're not. And so really, if you're saying, hey, I'm pulling my directs together for a couple of days of planning and we'll come back to you, I don't think anyone someone else expected to be a part of it.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about expectation setting, right? The other thing that I have done in the past as well is to have a strategy session and then have a planning session right afterwards, to have the group still being together, especially with people working more remotely. There's often very little opportunity to get the whole group together. So you can play around with different outcomes that you require at different points and potentially combine some of that as well. So that's having, for me, a strategy component and a planning component could potentially go hand in hand a little bit if you order it correctly. I think, one of the key elements that we discussed before we sitting down with this entire audience today is the importance of gathering context before you even dive into the offsite, and understanding and appreciating what pre-work needs to be done. So, there's a number of stakeholders that you may want to involve, or, we would recommend you involving in the preparation for the offsite. First of all, it's the CEO, but then also other department heads who have a dependency on, on the people function to do their job. Your HR leadership group, your actual, your head of talent acquisition, your head of people operations, etc., and then potentially other groups as well. Now, I'm curious to hear like who you lean on most, and did you find access to your CEO? It depends a little bit of company size as well, but did you manage to sit down with your CEO and to really go through what's set in the, the head of your CEO, and what were the type of questions that you would ask your CEO? Dipti, do you want to dive in?
For us. Yes. I mean, so you have a bunch of questions here, which I think are awesome, and I'll let everyone read and without draining the slide. But there's other things that I would always want to know, like, what are the key opportunities in this environment? So if the environment has changed, yes, it probably has a lot more constraints, but that always creates different opportunities. So in this environment, what are we thinking of as our opportunities, and what can we capitalize on? What do we think are our top strengths? What are our competitors? What do we worry about the most there? Where do we think we'll grow? Because you can grow by, I don't mean headcount, but you still need to grow by either geography or new product line or new vertical. There's always a new strategy that's kind of bubbling behind the scenes on what you need to do. And understanding that will have a big role in kind of influencing your people strategy. So just as much business context as possible is really helpful.
And did you feel like your CEO was open with that? Did you have to probe a lot, or did they willingly give that information? How did that work?
Yeah, so mostly if you're a part of the leadership team meetings, you should have it upfront. Like I rarely had to set up a separate interview with the CEO and go through these, because you'd know it from the discussions of all the weekly meetings and conversations that are coming up. But a good CEO should share this freely with their trusted leadership team. I just think that's so critical.
Noah.
Yeah, I'm like echo a lot of what Dipti said, and like it's so important to have that trust with your CEO, and like nothing should really be a surprise when you have these conversations. If you do set up a separate conversation with your CEO and sit down with them for an hour and kind of go through your list of questions, there really shouldn't be many surprises. One thing I always like to ask is this, like, what keeps you awake at night? Like, what's the one thing that's like causing you anxiety, and is there anything that we can do about that on the people team? And sometimes it's yes, and sometimes it's no. But it's good to know that context of what is causing them a lot of anxiety and stress. And I know as CEOs and founders, that level of stress can be very, very high, and just understanding where they're coming from sometimes can, help you form your strategy and what you want to be focusing on. I think another big thing is also just like asking them, what were they happy with from the people team? What was the one thing that they really enjoyed that we did this year and they want us to continue to focus on in the year, like the moving forward year, and making sure that we're continuing to align on those expectations.
Sorry, if I can just add one more thing before we can move on. It's sometimes even really nice to just invite the CEO and the CFO into your planning offsite. So you don't always have to have the conversation with them up front and then translate the summary of it to your team. Just bring them into that conversation. I know my team has always really valued both the CEO and in a separate session, the CFO dig in, because they learn so much. You can just see the minds open in those moments.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can't agree more. It's just really great to have your it also kind of shows the importance that they put on the people function, right? Just to kind of have that acknowledgement, like this team is important to me. One more question that I always add is, where is the people function adding most value in the company? Just to kind of get this sense of strength as well. Like, what does the CEO see as the biggest kind of strength of the people team, and where do we add least value as a group? So where are we weakest? To kind of get that that acknowledgement and understanding what is in the mind of the CEO as it relates to the people function. We will send a whole bunch of questions to participants after this as well, that you can ask your CEO in advance. So what's involved in planning for a successful outcome of the meeting? If we go to the next slide here, I'd like to kind of start with a quick poll. What is, I'm very curious to hear from this audience, what is the outcome you're looking for within your offsite? And you can see the questions coming up. So if you don't mind popping in a quick response there. And I'm very curious to see what people say, because it may have been a little bit different when we were all together in the office. If you're working remotely now, the prioritization and the desired outcome of the offsite may be slightly different from before. So take 15 seconds or so to fill in this multiple choice that you see popped up on your screen.
So we
picking up your next. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, I'm the voice from beyond. So we still have some responses coming in, but I'm going to end the poll because we're really just changing in terms of percentage. So we have, I'll go ahead and share the results with everyone. We have pretty close top two with alignment 63% and prioritization 59%. And then bonding is at 35, and innovation is in last place with 24% of the results. So again, that's alignment, prioritization, then our lower two are bonding and innovation.
Does that surprise you, panel? Noah, Dipti?
I was surprised to see innovation a little bit lower than I would have expected, I guess.
I would echo the same, especially with the, I kind of feel like in the current climate, we have to be super creative with what's going to happen in the next year, whether your budgets are freezing or hiring is freezing or whatever, and like focusing on how do we grow the current team instead of just hiring out. I would have thought innovation would be a little bit higher.
And for me, it's probably no surprise that bonding is higher. I remember sitting all like having the team predominantly sit in the same office, and bonding was taking place throughout the year, right? Like it's the night out and just social activities could take place any week really. So you can see bonding probably is going to take an even stronger kind of outcome, like desired outcome of the outcome is bonding, because you may not see each other for the entire year. And I think that's a real challenge for remote companies. Like, is this offsite about bonding as well or not? And how does that work exactly? So to get more into the practicalities of an offsite, there's a little bit of timing involved in all of this as well. And I put up a high-level timeline, and I'm giving the caveat that it's probably tight, especially if you're flying people in from overseas. But I think at a minimum, you have to start planning for an offsite, over 2 months out, like a quarter out, like 10 weeks in advance. You should really start to gather context from your CEO, from department heads, from participants. Most certainly the participants list has to have already been set. Then about 8 weeks out, you should share a rough agenda of what's going to be discussed and all of that stuff to the participants, and start sharing the logistics, where the event is going to be, all of the really practical stuff that people need to know. And especially if you're flying in people from overseas, you probably need to be a bit earlier with the logistics as well. But then 4 weeks out, you really have to start gathering your data, facilitate, have a plan on how to facilitate all the agenda topics. And because you're the head of people, you'll be leading this yourself, right? You're so involved in this. Even if you have a facilitator facilitating your offsite, in my cases, I never really had that luxury. So I was facilitating it myself, and I was putting together the exercises and all of that stuff. Then about 2 weeks out, you update your context, because lots can happen in this turbulent economic environment. Context can change every week. And then a week out, people really should be receiving their pre-reads before the offsite. Just curious to hear, Noah, is that like your planning as well, like, a quarter in advance, or did you plan earlier or later? What's your experience been?
I mean, I think that's best case scenario, what you highlighted. I don't think that's what typically happens. Let's all be honest, we're all kind of overworked and under-resourced. I'd say the one thing like that we really focus on is really communicating in advance the dates, especially like you said, if you're flying people into a location. People got families, people got partners, people got pets, people have, they might be caregivers for elderly parents. They have to really make sure that those things are being taken care of while they're away. And so just giving people as much lead time as possible of like, hey, these are the dates for the offsite. And so it's nice to like even just make it the same week every year, or the same dates every year of like, hey, the first week of October or November, whatever it is, that's when we do our annual offsite. And so just plan for that time that you're going to not be at home, which really helps to do those types of things, and making sure there's a cadence for that stuff, I think is super, super important.
Yeah, I agree with Noah. I think logistics as early as possible, but then everything else I do think happens in a more compressed time frame. Like what you had there, I think yours is like the ideal type, but the world just is doesn't usually work like that. And there's so many moving parts to the context. Like I could never, as much as I'd wanted to, I could have never set an agenda 8 weeks in advance because there's big pieces of information I'm waiting on before I decide, hey, this topic is going to be relevant or not, or whatever it might be. But the other piece, like you mentioned yours, you were like, you ended up having to facilitate a lot of it yourself and think through the exercises and all of that. And I think most heads of people don't have the luxury of having an external facilitator. So I think a lot of people are in that position. But what I'd say, one of the things that I learned really early in my career is if I delegate that facilitation out and I say, hey, you have this topic of the area, you have this team building, you have that, then it actually ends up being much better than if I did it myself. Like just people are just so much more creative than I could ever be when I'm trying to do it at midnight on top of a day job, trying to like all of that stuff. And styles change and energy changes and like all of that. Like I just had rotating facilitators and it was amazing. Like you really tap into the creativity of your group and your team.
Absolutely. And you can always provide a bit of coaching there as well, right? So very good point, Dipti. I actually forgot to mention that as well. It's, like having people like involved in the facilitation is really, really good. So on the day, moving on to on the actual days, and we'll keep this relatively short because a lot of the work has already been done. So if we go forward on the slide, how do we recommend structuring our offsite agenda? Like what's actually in the agenda? What are some of the topics that are being discussed? Touching on this really quickly, and we'll send out some more information after the webinar as well. But what do you typically include in the agenda? I've got a few here, like team bonding stuff. I generally speaking have a section on reflections from last year. There's planning exercises. Is there anything specific that you generally speaking include, Noah and Dipti, in your agenda?
I can go first. So a couple of different things. One is I think of team bonding as both structured and unstructured. Unstructured is like we're going to go out and have a happy hour and have dinner after, and everyone's just going to chat, and we're just going to be people, and that's super important. But then I also think through structured onward, like whether it's a lifelines activity or something else that like encourages people to share and drives intimacy in some format. I build that into the agenda, and I think that's super important. Because it draws everyone in a more balanced manner. The other thing I do is, and this might be kind of reflections of last year, like what you captured there, but I do a session on what's working and what isn't. And I often use like a stop, start, continue framework. There's a ton of frameworks, but something that really says, hey, what do we stop doing? Because you can't just keep adding more and more and more onto your agenda. At some point, something's got to give. So a stop, start, continue kind of helps with that prioritization thought process. So I like that. And then the other exercise I really like doing is what do we want to be known for, which is different than what do we want to do, because it changes the lens and you say, hey, what do employees want us to do as opposed to what do we want to do? And I think that always brings up different points and different ideas.
I don't really have a whole lot more to add to what Dipti said. Like, I love the structured and unstructured. I think that's super important, and figuring out what's going to work for your team. And I think having that structured team bonding time is really pushing people outside their comfort zone is really important, because it kind of breaks down those walls and, deflates egos in those conversations. And so making sure that people kind of can get silly and be kind of different and do things that are outside of their comfort zone, I think really boosts creativity in those types of things. But I'm maybe this is a little bit more different, but I actually really try and reduce the reflections of last year section in our agenda. I want it to be really quick. I don't want it to become a practice in sort of self-justifying your position or your role of like, look at all the things that I did last year. But like sort of like what Dipti said of just like what worked and what didn't. And then, if we have to discuss some of the things that didn't work, like what did you learn from that? But making it really like narrow and focus and just people aren't being like, here's my 30-minute, 40-minute presentation of all the things I did last year. It's like, I don't I trust that you did your job. That's why you're still here. I just want to know what worked and what didn't work. So really making sure that's really focused for the reflections piece, I think is really important.
Yeah, timekeeping is going to be as important, just like Lexi is moving along the slides to keep me on time here during this webinar to cover everything. It's really important, yeah. So I wanted to dive into some practical things around facilitation techniques to use as well that I found very useful in the past. So I'm just gonna like share a few to the audience that I particularly liked. The first is a facilitation technique that can be used to kind of start prioritizing some of the work that you want to do in the next year, and to really have a better understanding of like what's actually happening, what kind of value do we deliver to the employees in the organization, which is an exercise around the employee journey coverage. Now, how this facilitation technique works is that you draw out a employee journey map with all the moments that matter throughout the employee journey. And I will, thank you very much. You'll have to click out of you have to close the little boxes. Yeah. Now, here you can see the journey map, and you can see if you scroll a little bit to the right, you see the entire journey appearing with all the moments in the little pills up front. So in the live event, you see parental leave is an important moment. Birthdays are an important moment. Anniversaries are an important moment. If you scroll more to the right, you may have other events like, or if you scroll a little bit more to the right, Lexi.
Sorry, I was trying to get fancy with annotation. I'll just
think
scroll.
like becoming a manager for the first time. There's information that you need to give those new managers, etc., etc. So if we scroll back to live events, Lexi. So here you can see, for example, take parental leave, right? The question is, do you actually provide, coverage for that moment? Do you actually have the right information available for employees as they're leaving the company to go on parental leave? And when they come back, does a manager know how to put together a return to work plan? Having an overview of all these moments throughout the journey, and there's free tools available, like for example, what we're showing right now. There's other tools, there's other journey map templates out there as well. We can share this one after the webinar. But the general sense is like, as a people team, you want to have coverage across all these journey moments, and you want to know which one to prioritize. So you can indicate on the little tick boxes below. Do we have what we need? Do we have communications in place for all of these moments, et cetera, et cetera? So that's a great facilitation technique to do with your group, and to see like how do we, how much coverage do we have across the journey? The second technique that I've used in the past is when you actually want to set those strategic priorities, to define the strategy. So this is really a smaller group of people doing this, maximum of 12 people. And you want to identify your top priorities. It's great to avoid groupthink and to have just a few voices speak, is to break up the group in, let's say, 4 groups, with everyone identifying the top 4 or 5 priorities for HR for the next year. Now, you only give people about 30 minutes to do that, so it's not going to be enough. But after 30 minutes, you're going to have one person in the group remain, and the other 3 people find another location, find another group to join. And everyone does this. So basically, you're going through the exercise again. The person who stays behind explains a little bit what was discussed last time. And all these other people who came back from other groups. So they have their knowledge from other groups in their heads as well. And the goal of the second round is to, again, come up with the top 4 or 5 priorities. But this time it's going to be slightly better because it's informed by other groups as well. You're doing that again and again and again. And at some point, you will see the alignment between the groups obviously increasing, which is fantastic because everyone is really understanding what is important. And secondly, you're getting closer and closer to the perfect set of priorities as well. So that's a great facilitation technique. The other facilitation technique, if you are a little bit more in that planning phase, so you have a slightly larger group and you're planning the year ahead, is to literally put a poster or like one of those big sticky notes on your wall for every single month. So every month, you know, January, February, March, right? The first thing you do is you have people on little sticky notes fill out what needs to happen in a given month, right? If open enrollments happen in a certain month, you put a sticky note for the month that is supposed to happen. If you want to do something on International Women's Day, you know that date is not going to move. So put a sticky date there, a sticky note there, right? Salary reviews, performance reviews. So that's where you start. And the second thing you ask people to do is like, what initiatives do you think we ought to be doing based on the strategic priorities that we've already set in previous conversations? And people will start to write them down and put them in their preferred months as well. Now you will find that in the earlier months, the amount of work is going to be overloaded. In the later half of the year, you see hardly any sticky notes. Then you can start talking about prioritization, weighing which things need to happen first and after to provide a more smooth kind of strategy throughout the year. Very powerful. Now, I wanted to share one thing as well. We've just released our open calendar. I think we sent a little note to the participants today. If you want to know what happens, what are the static things that happen every month, you can use our just recently released HR calendar as well. And you can see what holidays are taking place in any given month. You can sort by location, world or Australia or in the United States. And the cool thing is as well, if you scroll down a little bit, if you show one of those holidays, like say MLK Day, you can click on that. And if you have your entire employee communications ready as well. This is more of a fun thing for if you're actually writing the communications. Obviously, you wouldn't be using this during your strategy planning exercise, but the HR calendar, you probably want to, you know, have open as well in the background so you know what happens in any given month. So those are a few a few facilitation kind of techniques to consider. So quickly on the day, what are some of the strategies and considerations for on the day? Like what is, so these are facilitation techniques. What other things are happening on the actual day? Do you do icebreakers? I have as a suggestion to always have a parking lot because there's a lot of discussions and ideas that are, you know, that are coming up and you don't have time to discuss all of them. So to have a parking lot, like a poster where you can write down, hey, we're going to be discussing this at a later stage is very helpful. Dipti and Noah, any other things that you would recommend doing on the day?
I always designate a note taker, and we can have a rotation so it keeps changing by topic or group so that there isn't enough pressure and so much pressure on one person, but having someone accountable for capturing the conversation and decisions made.
One thing I like to do is really set the ground rules for how the meeting's going to be run. So talking about, you know, how we all take our turns and have those discussions and one thing we're trying to do more of here is, you know, when someone's speaking, there's no interruption and you have to let them have that pause after they're done speaking to finish their thoughts before you can kind of jump in and chime in. And even you can go so far as to this, like everyone takes a turn and we're just going to go around the table and everyone takes a turn. And maybe you have something that signifies that somebody's still thinking. Maybe they stand up and talk and maybe they're still thinking through their thoughts and they're still standing and everyone just has to wait until they're done. One thing that actually just came out of my team as we were having a conversation about the webinar was that, you know, often people will be talking and you want to say something because you're, oh, I have something I want to add to this. And you maybe you raise your hand or you kind of signal somebody like, hey, I want to chime in here. But as long as you have your hand up or you're kind of trying to get your word in, you're not listening to the person anymore. And so maybe your note taker, you know, sees that person and is like, okay, gives them a little thing like, I've written your name down. And as soon as this person's done speaking, we'll go to you for your question. And so now that person's been acknowledged, they can now put their hand down and then begin listening again to whoever's speaking. And so that they're actually paying attention to what's happening. I thought it was a great idea. And something that I want to start doing in our teams now. And I was like, oh, I love just talking through these things. This is great. New idea that we can do in our meetings.
I love that. Love that. And Noah, just your point about ground rules reminded me that something else that works really well is actually opening it up right at the beginning and asking the team to build ground rules together. So you could start and say, hey, I have one ground rule, which is, hey, nobody talks over anyone else. Like that's super important to me. But what other ground rules should we have? Which is exactly what your team came up with. The ideas you can tap into are fantastic and you get buy-in. Everyone's like, these are our collective ground rules for these next 2 days or whatever it might be.
Fantastic. I got one more, little kind of tip is to show the end result of a section of the day or the entire day in the beginning as a template. So, for example, if you're looking to come up with a strategy plan that looks something like the one on the left or the one on the right, whatever you decide, it's handy for people to have a visual in mind of what they're going to be headed towards. Because otherwise the discussions can kind of rattle on, but you can kind of keep people on track. Like, hey, remember, we need to, it's our job after this offsite, we will come up with our top priorities and our key metrics associated with that. If you pick the one on the left, for example, or we owe it to our entire people team and the organization to come up with things that we're going to prioritize and deprioritize. Having that clarity can be very helpful as well. So yeah, moving on to the aftermath and nearing the end of the webinar and going into questions in a moment as well. Like, how do you wrap up the day and what do you do after? So I'm curious, Dipti, do you have any wisdoms on like what do you do actually to make sure you tie a bow on the day and things go well afterwards as well, which is as important.
Yeah, for me, the big thing is agreeing what we want accountability to look like. So like my pet peeve is we come up with all these beautiful ideas and a great strategy, and then no one does squat. A week later, everyone's got caught up in their day-to-day work. And so for me, it's always like, hey, how are we coming back together? When are we doing it? How are we informing each other if we're off track? How are we living up to the commitments that we agreed to on this page? That accountability and follow through is probably the most important part for me of wrapping up.
So accountability comes, you assign owners, like is it like literally
assign owners, but assign the rhythm of follow-up. So it's not just the owners, but we're going to meet every month and have dedicated time to go back to these goals as opposed to just the day-to-day operations of things that come up, something like that.
To that point, I actually would set in the meeting sometimes those next meetings as well. So because everyone is there, right? Everyone can open up their calendar right there, and don't leave the day before you set up those subsequent meetings as well. Can be 10 minutes well spent. Noah.
Yeah, it's like what Dipti said of like really making sure there's that cadence after the fact, and when are we going to meet, who owns what are we going to do, and then maybe even assigning the tools that we're going to use to like check in on that progress, whether you're using Asana or Notion, or maybe it's a Lattice for your OKRs, but like where are we going to start putting this information so that we all know where to check. So kind of putting that single source of truth of like, because we all have our favorite tools, and we all have like, I might be doing all my notes in Google, somebody else might be using notes on their laptop, somebody might be a little bit more old school and actually writing it in a notebook, but being like, what is the single source of truth for everything that we just prioritized, and where we're going to be putting our updates?
And Noah, your assigned note takers, or was it Dipti who mentioned it? I forgot, but like, they can actually provide a little summary as well that you can share later as well.
Yeah, that was Dipti.
Just a few other ones, like, send a follow-up email to the participating group. I know it sounds like super simple, but, like a day or two after, just like what were the outcomes, just to kind of summarize it and thanking people, and ask for feedback. Like, do a little survey, right? It doesn't have to be, I'll send some questions after this, some questions you may ask after this webinar as well to participants, but like having a set of questions, because you're most likely going to be doing an offsite next year as well. You don't want to fall into the same traps of the same mistakes that you made this time. And also you want to know what people really liked, what worked for you as well. So having a little survey afterwards is very helpful. So yeah, going into questions mode. Love to hear from, if you are participating, you may have already submitted the question, but if you you can do so now as well, and hopefully we can answer all of your questions now.
Yeah. Hello.
Lexi,
I'm back.
You're
In
back.
the virtual flesh. Yeah, our Q&A is open. If you have a question that you would like answered, that's the best place to share it with us. And I've also reshared Joris, Dipti, and Noah's LinkedIn profile if you want to connect with them. Joris will be doing a little AMA, just sharing some thoughts after the webinar on LinkedIn if you want to keep the conversation going. And if you want to upvote a question to get it answered, go ahead and do that. We have 4 questions right now. So I think we will start with this top question is, what is the best way to guide prioritization and spread out the initiatives? What's the right extra large, medium initiatives per quarter based on best practice and average resources? It's a big question. Who wants to take that one?
I think Noah would have so much wisdom to share.
Yeah, so best way to guide prioritization. I think it comes back to, like, you know, you've had those conversations with your CEO and all your department heads. They've given you their priorities. Maybe you've got like a people analytics person or team who's also bringing in some data and looking at like your data. So I think you have to inform your prioritization with all of those different pieces. So what has been prioritized by my department heads, what's been prioritized by my CEO or co-founders, and then what is being prioritized by my employees, the people that I'm supposed to be supporting, my clients, if you will, and then trying to kind of, you know, manage all of those expectations from all those different groups and then prioritize that way. So my CEO really wants to do this, but that kind of pushes back against what my employees really want. So maybe I need to like do a little bit of conversation between those 2 groups, or my priority right now is, okay, I need to clarify with them, or I need to clarify with my team. So really taking a step and looking at the whole picture and not just things in isolation. And then for the other part of like, what is the right extra large, medium initiatives per quarter? I think that really comes down to your team and what you think they can handle, because every team is going to be so different. I mean, like you look at a startup and you have a mighty team of 1 who does everything, you know, and, you know, they might be able to take on only 1 large initiative per quarter because they have to do everything else. Maybe you have specialists in every one of your departments. Maybe you have multiple departments with multiple team members. It really kind of depends on the makeup of your team and their specializations, and also like where they're at in their career journey. If you have, you know, maybe 1 really senior person, but a lot of junior people in 1 department, they might not be able to do the same initiatives as if they were all more senior. So I think it really, you have to take into consideration the whole makeup of your department and what those people can do. And this is where you need to lean in on your department heads and say, you know, like you have this team, you know them better than I do. I know you, but I don't know your team as well as you do. So what do you think you could do per quarter? And like really make people be honest and say, like, you know, like 30% of what we do in HR, if you're lucky, is the day-to-day stuff that just comes up. So you're really only prioritizing 70% of your time.
Awesome.
I couldn't agree more with all of that. If there's one thing I could add, Lexi, to what Noah was saying, it's also look at it from the lens of what employees can absorb. So if there's the primary driver is what can we do? What are we resourced to be able to actually execute on? But then like I've rolled out stuff on the 3rd month of a quarter when all the sales team is just trying to hit their targets. And I regretted that so bad. Like, just think of what's going on in their lives and when will they actually appreciate this change of whatever I'm rolling out.
Just as a general kind of sense check as well, you know, when looking at Atlassian, right, big organization with lots and lots of people, obviously, right? If you look at it from a company level, they only had like 1 major initiative every quarter as well. Right, like give or take, right? So if that's the case, you know, maybe have a similar kind of like frame of mind as well from a people perspective. Like you probably just have 1 bigger initiative, like big rock per quarter. And then your departments like talent acquisition or people ops may have like a smaller one, but that's, you may not even need to communicate that to the business, right? Like I think it's all Dipti, simplify the messages. It creates so much more focus for you as a group. And if as an organization level, we do that with all these people, then most certainly we should do that in the people function as well. It's a great question. Thanks for asking. Whoever asked that one, it's great.
I think we have
Lexi.
time for one more. And I might add a little element from a second question. So the main question that I want us to address is how to facilitate a hybrid on-site. So if you have a group where part of the people are in the office, but some people can't be there in person, how would you do that? And the extra element that I'm adding from another question is just that focus on equity and inclusion in general, whether you're hybrid or all in person. 5 minutes, go.
No pressure. Dipti, do you have like a perspective on it? I don't know if you've gone through this as well. Yeah.
I definitely have, and I can give you my 2 cents. One is we notice a lot that if you really focus on everyone, like the example here is 13 people in a room and 3 people on Zoom. If you build that out, the people on Zoom are really inevitably excluded from the chatter in the room because they can't always hear and the mics aren't good and someone's turned away from the camera. And like, it's a very hard experience for the 3 on Zoom. So we always said, if there's any kind of hybrid, everyone's going to log into their laptops so that every face is an equal face on the Zoom. And that like, it's just much more inclusive and someone being able to break into the conversation. So I think you can't change the fact that there's 13 people in the room, but you can make the interface a lot more inclusive. That's one thing to think of. We always said note-taking would happen on a shared doc, like a Google Doc or whatever it might be, but something that everyone had access to very visibly, be able to see and track so that conversations were missed. And then we use things like, I mean, there's a million softwares, but like we use something like Google Jamboard for whiteboarding. So again, try and use the virtual free tools that are available to you that really can be as inclusive as possible.
Noah, anything specific to add to that?
No, not really. I would echo the same practices. Like if you've got people in a room and people on a Zoom, it's gonna be awful for the people on the Zoom. Like there's no getting around that. There's fancy speakers that follow speakers and all that kind of stuff, or microphones that do that, but it's still never great. And so just having everyone log in to their laptop with their headphones and making sure people are muting properly and kind of setting those ground rules, I think that's the best way you can handle that situation when there's somebody who's not able to join in person.
It's still tough because that bonding doesn't really take place, and those conversations that you have, like more socially, just don't take place. But it's gotten a little bit better as well, like tools like FigJam and stuff like that, or Miro, or all of those tools do help. I would say, I mean, it depends, of course, if people can't be present for a because their personal circumstances, versus if the people actually want to be there, right? If people want to be there but they're across the world, that's that money required to fly them in maybe worth it, right? It depends on the person's personal circumstances, but I will put everything, I would even like cut some things here and there to fly the people in, because you don't want to have 2 or 3 people not attending because of monetary restrictions as such. So yeah, is that the time, Lexi, or do we have more questions, or
we have 2 more questions, but I'm going to call it. We will try to answer those via email or in another way. Thank you for asking them. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. Thank you for calling me a Zoom wizard. I really appreciate that. And again, you will get the recording from today. You'll get all the resources that we shared. And thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Joris, Dipti, and Noah, for your time today and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Dipti. Thanks, Lexi. See ya.